A big step that you might take in the future, and one that I recently took, is transitioning from being a PhD student to a postdoc or some type of fellow. And today I just want to briefly talk about my experience taking this step so far. I feel like being transparent on this journey here will hopefully make your journey feel more normal, and will hopefully allow you to get some insight into what might happen in your future and what those experiences might be like. So for those of you who are earlier on in their career or just don't know, let's quickly talk about what a postdoc actually is. In most fields that I'm aware of, graduating with a PhD is not enough to become a tenure track professor. So I have a PhD in physics, and in my experience, it usually takes 2 to 3 postdoc jobs to be ready for tenure. Postdocs, in my experience, are usually 2 to 3 years. There are special ones that are longer. And the rationale behind doing all of these postdocs and moving in between institutions and potentially countries for each postdoc is basically the following. So the rationale that was explained to me is that postdocs make you travel, meet a larger research network, and most importantly, they expand your research program. If you are more of a free spirit or you don't have strong roots down somewhere, this can absolutely be a great experience. You get to travel the world while doing physics, meeting new people and interacting with new cultures. But of course, everyone's circumstances are different, so this is going to be more difficult for some people than it is for other people. Postdoc life is simultaneously very similar to PhD life, while being completely different. Some postdocs do teach classes as the lead professor. You're not really a TA anymore, and others don't, and they just get to do pure research. So your primary function is to do research. Some postdocs, you are sort of left on your own and you run your own research program, and some postdocs you will be working under a supervisor, albeit with higher expectations than a PhD student. So I applied to Nottingham with about 2 years or a year and a half left in my PhD, and luckily got this posting. So I applied here because I thought it'd be a great fit for me to grow as a researcher. So the research direction here is similar to the research direction that I had back in Canada, but far away enough from that research direction that it will definitely open up a lot of new questions for me to potentially answer, and directions for me to take my research, as well as new techniques and a new tool belt to approach physics. And that's really what I wanted out of this job. I wanted to sort of broaden my view of my field. I feel like this is probably obvious, but it's really important to have like a broad range of topics that you can do research in, and a broad range of skills that you can potentially pull from. And of course, these things don't happen overnight. After your PhD, you will have a certain set of skills. After another postdoc, you will have another set of skills, and so on. So this process of doing postdocs is extremely beneficial. And you should challenge yourself. And I thought it would make sense to challenge myself as much as possible through this experience. So landing this job was, of course, extremely exciting. My wife and I decided to take the jump and move across the pond, as some people would say. So I've definitely traveled through the Americas quite a bit, but I've never been to Europe or really outside of the Americas. So honestly, just the location was really exciting. And of course, the research was really exciting as well. So my expectations for immigrating were a bit naive. I assumed it would be relatively easy to find and settle into a new apartment, and then transition to just focusing on research. And to be honest, I was a bit naive on both the research front and the moving front. So finding an apartment that made sense for my family was really difficult. I had a hard time calling from Canada to the UK and having people sort of take me seriously over the phone. And also, the UK isn't exactly the most pet-friendly place in the world. So I had to initially get an Airbnb, which I guess is normal, but it's just sort of, an extra expense. And then I had to go apartment hunting when I arrived. So luckily things move relatively quickly, at least in the city that I'm in. So it seems like you can have a conversation with a landlord or some type of a real estate agent or lettings agent, and maybe like the next week you can move into an apartment here. So with that in mind, I think they were a little annoyed with me calling from Canada, because in Canada, you can reserve an apartment like a month in advance, and like that's just sort of normal. But the main problem with finding an apartment was actually the fact that the UK actually isn't a very pet-friendly country. So I have a cat named Mika, and bringing a pet to the UK alone is quite a feat. It's expensive, and they can't travel with you in the airplane. But on top of this, it's extremely common for landlords here to not allow pets in their apartments. So this was, to me, very shocking, so very naive of me, as this is actually illegal in Ontario. So it never occurred to me that this would be different. But eventually we found an apartment, but then of course we had to furnish it because we were bringing a cat. Of course, we were hoping naively to get a furnished apartment, but that of course didn't work out based off of our context. And so we had to furnish the apartment, buy this desk that I'm working on here, get a couch and so on. But of course, like all of these difficulties are just sort of a part of immigrating anywhere. So a lot of these difficulties are just a function of me having never left Ontario in my life. So the problem with moving with a cat now, I have essentially been forced to settle more completely in this area than I had expected. So I have a bunch of furniture, and so on. And the problem with this is that, I'm a postdoc. Postdocs don't get paid that much money. And I also won't be staying here for very long. So it's not exactly ideal setting up a whole new life in a new country like this, just to leave it behind after 2 years. But I think that's okay. I think I've learned a lot from this move, and we'll be better and more prepared for the second move. There was also some strange things, like it took a month and a half to set up internet in my apartment. So things in general seem to move a little bit slower here than in Canada, which was, sort of initially frustrating, but I've gotten used to it. And I think just on a human level, how similar the UK is to Canada probably caused more culture shock than if I immigrated to a country with a completely different culture. I think as a Canadian, there's always sort of a suspicion that we aren't so different from some of the other English-speaking countries. It might be difficult for Canadians to articulate the core differences between ourselves, the Americans, and the English, for example, aside from maybe some political issues and some stereotypes. And of course, when you go sightseeing in another country, you miss a lot of the core aspects of the culture, of course. So I would say that's been a really cool aspect of moving to England. So even with it being a place that is very similar to Canada in a lot of respects, it's given me a fresh perspective on Canada itself. I definitely think we are quite distinct with our own core assumptions on the world. Anyway, so my move here was poorly planned and hectic, which made getting settled here take a lot longer than expected. As a Canadian, though, despite the fact that I complain about things moving slow here, I have to say that I actually really do like the city. The public transportation, for example, is awesome here. You'll never find public transportation like Nottingham has for a city this size in Canada. And a lot of the city is actually walkable. I have my core necessities met within maybe 10 minutes of walking. So it's definitely been a fun experience outside of research. And I'm really glad I've gotten this opportunity through physics to do this. So transitioning into my new research direction at Nottingham was also interesting. 3 projects were proposed to me. So out of the 3, I picked one. And I picked the one that I thought would be ambitious for me to get up to speed on, and it would be hopefully unfamiliar to me, basically. One of the projects I definitely could have started out of the three. I definitely could have started making progress a lot sooner. And the other two projects that were pitched to me were definitely field adjacent, but it would teach me a lot of new skills, and it would expose me to a lot of new ideas. So I picked one of those two. So for those of you who are interested, I'm working with something called dual unitary models or dual unitary circuits. So this is a type of quantum circuit model that can be analytically proved that they are something called quantum chaotic. So this ability to make analytical progress in these models is unique as far as I am aware. So I definitely underestimated the time it would take me to be more comfortable with the material. But from what I've been told and what seems reasonable is that this is normal. Unless your background fits into the professor's research program perfectly, you aren't going to slide in easily to your new role. Maybe 2 to 3 months seems appropriate to properly onboard and feel comfortable. And of course, feeling comfortable doesn't mean you're just ringing off results. It more or less means you're in a place where getting results now seems reasonable. And on some level, I have to say, if the transition period isn't difficult for you and you aren't learning a lot, you have either probably established a really strong research program and should be looking for permanent positions, tenure positions, or perhaps you aren't in a good environment to grow as a researcher. So I am glad that there is struggle and that I am learning a lot in this new role. But of course, with this transition, where you go from, being very comfortable in your research program, PhDs are 4 years. If you did a master's, maybe you're up to 5-6 years in your program. So you're really comfortable with that program, and then you're transitioning to trying to get up to speed to a new one, and this can be very anxiety-inducing. I've definitely had anxiety. So as always, I hope that you find yourself in a research group where you can communicate with your seniors in your new context and talk about expectations and how well you're doing. It's definitely always beneficial to communicate and it can alleviate a lot of stress and anxiety in these situations. So definitely bring up the conversation if you're in this situation or you're in a similar situation. You're always going to be harder on yourself usually than the people around you, so you'll be surprised how well you're doing. So there are definitely big differences in this new role compared to my PhD life. First off, I don't have tedious things come up that take me away from research. So there's no courses, no exams, and also no teaching in this current role. Second, I'm working with my supervisor more as a collaborator. I'm of course learning a lot from them in the process, and they're very much taking the lead. But the dynamic is definitely different from what I'm used to. So we both do our own problems in the research or work on the same problems, and we both drive the results. I imagine that this particular part of my experience probably varies from experience to experience and supervisor to supervisor, institution to institution. So another thing is that with all of my free time now, I'm able to juggle more projects. I might have 6 ongoing projects right now, depending on how you define project. So it could be more or it could be less. I think this is more or less expected. Your publication number per year should go up from your PhD days. And you should have more collaborators, etc. Another thing that I'm doing now is that I'm actually refereeing, which is really cool. So it's definitely a nice excuse to sit down and carefully read an interesting new article. And I also have something sort of resembling my own budget to go to conferences, which is quite cool. So overall, it's more or less what I liked about my PhD right now, while getting rid of a bunch of the stuff that I didn't like. A big change, though, is definitely that I feel a lot of extra pressure for performance. Knowing that I need to publish sooner rather than later to be competitive for the next round of postdoc applications. That pressure comes and goes, and it is entirely, the pressure comes entirely internally. I don't get any external pressure. It's all internal. No one is really pressuring me. Everyone's just collaborating and doing science, which is great. But I think the best part about all of this is that sometimes it just hits me that I just get to do physics all day for a living. The transition was difficult initially coming here, but I think the second move will be a lot easier, and I'm not intimidated by it, I guess. And interestingly, for those of you who have been around for a while on the channel, you might know that I get migraines quite frequently. Interestingly, I get far fewer migraines in England than I did in Canada, which has been an awesome side effect of the move here. I'm definitely not sure what's causing the improvement, but it makes me want to do a second postdoc in England. So that has been my experience so far. I hope this short rant about my transition was interesting and hopefully helpful. I think it's important to be transparent so other folks know that their situation is normal or potentially what to expect in their future. So that's it for today. If you liked the video, feel free to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below.